my brother that day Googled my name and found it.
Wow.
And then sent an email to the rest of my family.
So he outed you.
He outed me. Well, what he had done was he found, I love my family a lot, and I like to celebrate kind of our idiosyncrasies and whatnot, or at least I thought that's what I was doing at the time. And I had taken a picture of his 2 daughters in the bathtub, and I referred to them as little shits. And the email that he sent to me was, remove all instances of my daughter from your website and all calling them little shits, period. And I remember sitting in the cubicle at work, like, and the air just sucked out of the room, and I was like, they found my website! And I called my boyfriend at the time, who was now my husband. I was like, he found my website. And John's like, oh, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. And then that day my mom called and it was, is this because your father and I got divorced when you were 10? Yes it was.
Good, it's all your fault. How many of you have been outed in a similar way, thought your family didn't know about your blog and they found it? Oh, quite a few.
People are smarter now.
How many of you still don't think your family knows about your blog? I don't know. Have you Googled yourself? Really, you need to Google yourself. How about you?
What was the question?
Who did you think you were writing for?
Well, I knew that, again, you hear from a lot of bloggers, oh, I didn't know anyone was reading. I had sent it to some friends because it was easier than sending out mass emails. Actually, a coworker came to me one day and said, you should start a blog because it's just easier. So I realized that some coworkers were starting to read it as well. And then I really knew people were reading it when The Independent, a newspaper in London, left a comment on my blog and then called me and they said, we love your blog, yeah? And we're pissing ourselves over here, yeah? And we want to publish your blog, yeah? We're going to pay you, yeah? Yeah. So, wow. And I had no idea that, I'm also a photographer, so I was the photographer at the Hotel Gansevoort in New York City, and I was going to a lot of rooftop parties and taking pictures, and people would say, oh, well, where are these pictures going to be? And I'd be like, oh, well, I guess you could check them out on my blog. So I then knew that people were really starting to come out and read it.
So do you feel like blogging changed the way you perceived your own life as you lived it? I feel that sometimes where I'm thinking, oh, this will make a good blog post. I think everybody kind of feels that as it's happening. Do you think that's normal or weird, or is that just me? Or
I think that's actually common to any kind of artist, because what you're doing is you're trying to capture a moment as you're having it. So a lot of people say, well, does your life change because you're blogging? Did it put me in situations that I wouldn't have necessarily gone on, like really hideous dates, just so I'd have something to write about? Absolutely. I definitely did that, no question. It's like, well, I really don't want to go out with him, but maybe, there's a story there. So I would do it, but I think even if you're a writer, forget about Blogger, you're always thinking about how would this best translate into a story, even if it's, a photograph. I'm always walking around with my camera because I don't want to miss a moment. So I think you really are always in the moment if you're any kind of artist.
What do you think, Heather?
Well, there were days where I'm like, John, we really need to have some hot sex, because I'm just, have nothing to write about today, and I need the content. No,
But you never write about that.
Oh, no. I write a little bit about it, as much as he will let me. Yeah, he's probably, he doesn't censor me, but he's the number one person that I'm thinking of family-wise about, is this going to be okay, and is he going to go to a conference and be shaking someone's hand and they're going to go, I know what you did to her.
Right.
And it's kind of happened before, and we get home and he's like, do you have any idea what this is like for me? And I'm like, no. I don't.
Sorry. Well, you had said some interesting things to me on the phone about your friends and how they felt about your blog, which I haven't personally encountered, so I'm curious what other people had.
I think it really started when I was on the cover of the New York Times style section, and it really picked up, and my friends were like, I love you, obviously, but this makes me feel like shit about our friendship. And I'm like, well, why? What am I doing wrong? Like, what's upsetting you? Well, these stories, you've always made yourself so vulnerable to me as your friend. I was the one who got to hear these stories. And now you're telling them to everyone, and it makes me feel like our friendship matters less. Now, they finally, and I'm like, well, that is one of the hard things, I guess, about living with a writer or having a writer in your life, that you do have to share them in some way. But they came around, and now if I'm telling them a story, they're like, "Did you have to write this on the blog?" So they've come, they've
Do
come
they
full
still want to
circle.
hear it first, though?
Probably, yeah.
You have a similar?
I've had the same experience. I've had some friends from high school who refuse to read it because they think that I have abandoned the friendship and now I'm sharing myself with the world and they aren't special anymore. I think it's interesting, like my husband, he gets to live the experiences with me and then read about them, my interpretation of them, which isn't always exactly how he experienced them. But what was really interesting is, like, back in 2004, when I had really bad postpartum depression, I found that I was able to work through what I was feeling better by writing about it than by talking about it. And he would call me, from work and say, how are you doing today? And I would try to tell him how things were going, and then he would 2 hours later read about what I was feeling and come home and say, I didn't know it was this bad. And he never resented the fact that I didn't tell him first, because he knew that I needed that exercise to get it out.
But he's a blogger too, right? So does he ever blog the same stories?
Yeah, not really. No, we kind of call dibs on the stories.
Really?
Absolutely.
There anybody else out here married to a blogger? Well, not that many. You're probably good to keep, right to keep it to yourself, right? But, on a more serious note about how your friends and family feel in the aftermath of finding your blogging, I mean, you had some really interesting things to say about how it changed how you felt about yourself after your family found your blog, and how it changed the way you blogged.
It changed the way I live, actually. I mean, it changed my entire outlook on life. I said some horrible things about religion, some horrible things about my family, and then I said some horrible things about the boss that I had who would come to work with the needles where they had, injected Botox into her lips, and which begged to be blogged about. And I had said horrible things, and then got fired, and then lost the trust of my family. And that's when I took the website down for several months, because I did not like who I was. And
how close were those two events, the losing the job and the...
It was September and February, so 5 or 6 months. And I mean, it was almost like, you have to beat me over the head for me to get, this is not a good idea. And I took a break, and I was like, I don't want to put that back into the world, because that was coming right back at me. And it changed the way I approach relationships and friendships, and it definitely changed the way I write about people on my website.
So how so?
I want people to be, when they pull up my website, I don't want them to dread the fact that I may have written about them. I want them to go, I hope she did. I want them to be happy that they've seen me in my stories.
So now do people like, why haven't you blogged about me?
Yeah. All the time, yes.
I must not be that important. How about you? Do you get that now from your friends and
Which
family?
part? Why don't you?
Why haven't you blogged?
I get a lot of someone telling a story and go, don't you dare write about this on your blog. Don't flatter yourself. Like, sorry, but it's not that interesting. Not everyone wants to read about, how you tricked someone into going out with someone else. So. No, actually, my family was really supportive. I mean, my immediate family, and they loved it.
Really?
I think my ex-mother-in-law and ex-husband would feel differently about that if you ask them, but my immediate family, they were all really supportive. And even though I've written about, in detail about my sex life or my children or everything from my miscarriage to having kids in the NICU to my son's emergency brain surgery, all these really personal things, but that my family feels like very supportive, that I found a vehicle that works for me and able to express myself.